Oh, hi. This week I made a dress that has been on my sewing bucket list for probably 15 years and it came out so good. I mean, there's things I would tweak and I'm not going to wear it every day. It's very much in my costume closet now, but dang, I'm so proud of myself. This was not an easy make, and yet still less hard than I thought it was going to be. So let's jump right into it. There's a lot to cover. Also, if you haven't seen A League of Their Own, I cannot recommend that movie enough. In honor of my fellow tall girl, Gina Davis, I had to make this dress because I got invited to a baseball game with the brewery that I work for. They took all the employees out and it was such fun time. I got the dress done about 20 minutes before I had to leave. Spoiler alert, this project was a success. One of those main reasons being, your girl made a mock-up and holy hell, I'm so glad I did. Not that I ended up tweaking all that much because I did keep the bigger size, and here's what happened is the size I bought, because I was in a not great headspace, and instead of just taking my own goddamn measurements before I decided what size to get, I just guessed that I had gone up 4 sizes and I didn't. But because of the style dress this was, where it overlaps in the front, it's actually for the better that it was a bigger size. But I do feel silly for automatically in my head just thinking I had to size up so much. Just read the numbers, check the finished measurements versus the actual like pattern size recommendations. Yes, ease is good, especially around the waist and like shoulders and where there's going to be a lot of movement, but in my opinion, most commercial patterns there is way too much ease. 4 to 6 inches on some of the ones that I've used, and I don't need that much room, especially for something that's supposed to be fitted. It should fit you. Anyway, different rants for a different day. So this was definitely a different style dress than I've made before. I mean, the circle skirt was pretty straightforward. I obviously made sure that there were pockets, but the way it overlapped in the front, the way the bodice went together, I had this little like shoulder yoke situation, and also had shoulder darts on the back, which I've never added shoulder darts, but any extra room for movement back there is helpful for me because I'm very broad shouldered, so often things are very tight when I try to do this. These are also out of like much heavier weight fabric than I used, and now I understand why there should have been a full lining for what the outfit was for. I'm still very glad I did the lining omissions where I saw fit, because it was barely tolerable having that on at an outdoor baseball game in the summertime last night. So yeah, I cut out all the standard size pattern pieces. I went with the size 18 on here because I got the bigger chunk of size options where normally I'd be like a 14. Most of the construction steps seemed pretty straightforward. Again, the specific type of shoulder yoke is not something I'd done before, but it went together easily enough. The diagrams are pretty helpful. This says to put the side seam together and then insert the sleeves. I hate doing that shit when there's an option to do it while it's all open. So I did do the underarm sleeve and then like side seam in one go, but other than that I like mostly followed the instructions. So then I tried on the mock-up. Again, I was just doing the bodice because the skirt is just a pretty standard circle skirt, so I know that that's gonna work for me, and especially because this is overlapping, I'm not making a fitted zip-in waistband or something. There was so much wiggle room with this dress. I was actually surprised how well this fit. I expected to be drowning as far as like the back piece and the shoulders, but again, very broad shouldered, broad chested, so it ended up working out. The one thing that definitely needed to get sorted out was the boob dart on the front, and that's typically where the boobs are, is on the front. I decided to do some gathering right there instead of doing the dart because I don't have particularly big boobs. I didn't need a ton of 3-dimensionalizing room in the front, and also having it be a dart gives it like a single point that it has to line up all the time to like hit the apex right, or else it's gonna look super weird. Where like gathers, it's just a little bit more freeform, so I went with the gathers. And the way I did that is I just unpicked the dart and unpicked the seam where there's like a midriff piece that the bust pieces attached to. So I undid where those connect a couple inches either side. I ended up moving the gathers pretty far to the right considering where the dart was, just because I had so much overlap that like the boob points were closer to the side seams than this size pattern needed them to be. So that was the only like real adjustment I had to do here. And to gather it, I just did 2 rows of the longest stitch setting I have, and I had tails on either end. I picked either both top threads or both bottom threads, and I just gathered it down until it lined up with the other side of the seam I had to put back together. And once I stitched that back together, it seemed to do the trick. Like I said, I just had to like move it over a little bit on the final dress. Especially because this neckline has like a scalloped situation happening. I thought it was gonna look super bonkers if I didn't change it to more of a squared off neckline flap overlap thing, overflap perhaps. But the way it lined up when I tried it on, I actually liked the little curve that it gave, so I just kept the neckline as is. It seemed like it was gonna work out surprisingly okay. So yeah, in the end, really glad I went with an oversized size. So then it was on to cutting out the actual fashion fabric. I did omit most of the lining pieces because I was going to an outdoor baseball game. I was going to be hot as shit. And because I changed from a dart to a gather, I've never gathered something that had interfacing. I'm not sure how to approach that if I make this again in a thicker fabric that needs the interfacing and like I want it to be more structured. But what I ended up doing was just making facings for all of the neckline pieces and then down to the bottom of the skirt, basically making like a giant placket. The only pieces I did fully line and interface were the midriff pieces, which is basically where a waistband would go on a skirt. Like that's where you want the most structure to be. So I did super reinforce that and did add actual lining pieces. Everything else just has interfacing along the little edge bit that I made for the inside, called a facing, if you are unfamiliar. And my reason for not adding a lining to the skirt, other than like keeping weight and heat off of this outfit, was that I was gonna wear a petticoat underneath, so like it was gonna block my shorts anyway. How I went about making the facings is I took all the pieces I was gonna need a facing for, so that's the back neck, the yokes, the front bits, the midriff pieces, and then there was actually a skirt interfacing piece that just copied the overlapping edges of the skirt. I traced that outer edge of everything just onto some like artist tracing paper that I have. I marked where the ends and everything were so I could sew them all together and make like one giant facing piece. And I measured in 2 inches because I wanted there to be like a little bit of width to this because it was also going to get sewn down. Though that inner edge, it doesn't have to be perfect. So I softened some of the curves and stuff because I wanted to serge that edge as well. The edge that was going to be like hanging free on the inside. The way I like to do really finicky pieces that need interfacing is that I cut the interfacing to size. So I took all the patterns I just made for the facings, copied that onto interfacing. I used some woven stuff, the SF101, but any kind of lightweight stuff would have been fine for this. I tend to just use whatever I have to use it up because interfacing is expensive and I don't want any of it sitting around not getting used. Then I took those and ironed them onto some like close to an appropriate size scrap piece of the fashion fabric I was using. And any parts I didn't have scraps for, I just kind of loosely cut around because nothing is worse than having a very particularly shaped, especially like these collar scalloped edges. Trying to keep really flimsy, floppy fabric like this and the interfacing lined up so that there's no edges that are like coming off and everything's perfect. I don't have the time or patience for that. So I like to just do the interfacing to size, iron it onto the scrappy fabric, then trim the whole thing down. Maybe less time efficient, but less of a headache, and it should be fun making things. Okay, then it was time to begin assembly. Breathe. I started with the gathers and the darts, so there were still darts on the back bodice piece. It wasn't until this part of the process that I realized one of the sleeves had a hole in it. These were thrifted bed sheets. I found them for $5. I also got matching king size pillowcases, but I didn't end up needing those because the king size one was enough fabric. This is like a T-length massive ass dress, and yeah, had plenty of fabric for it with the king size sheet, which is great. But just a little pro tip, if you don't have enough fabric out of a thrifted bed sheet and there's an accompanying fitted sheet, this is if you've thrifted a top sheet, but also like pillowcases, really good for the bodice pieces if they'll fit, or even just the pockets or something like that. So anyway, instead of using the sleeve with the hole in it, I had a very clever idea where I just cut a new sleeve because there was plenty of fabric left over. Also, in addition to the boob gathers, the sleeves also get a little bit of gathering. It's called easing it in. I'll show you how cool that looks in a second. I haven't done this in a couple years and I forgot how satisfying it is to do sleeves this way. When needed. They're not always needed. So yes, gathering stitches are in place, darts are in place. Time to do assembly. It's just bodice bits to the yoke bits to the back bits, and the bottom of the bodice gets attached to the midriff pieces and the back bottom of the bodice gets attached to its own midriff pieces. Then with the sleeves, normally when you do gathering stitches, you pull both threads either on the top or bottom the same amount so it gathers evenly across, and then you stitch between those two. When you're putting in a sleeve that has this like cool rounded look to it, you pull the thread closest to the edge more than the other one because you don't actually want any puckers or gathers in place, but you do want to like cinch that in a little bit more, and it gives this really cool rounded like cap effect. It is what they do to put like suit sleeves in. If you look at like a tailored coat, it has that kind of like rounded top of the sleeve, where if you have a t-shirt, it doesn't have that same effect to it. So I just think it's the coolest that you can mess with gathers and turn a two-dimensional item into something that has so much shape to it and endlessly fascinating. Sewing is so fucking cool. Anyways, once I did the underarm and side seams right sides together, the base of the bodice was constructed, and then it was time to make the skirt, which was a very straightforward circle skirt. Again, the front pieces were overlapping, so I didn't have to be super particular about the size. You bet your ass I added pockets. To attach the skirt once it was made, I laid the top of the skirt right sides together with the bottom of the bodice, lined up all the points. Then I sandwiched the skirt between that constructed bodice and the lining midriff piece that had the interfacing. So I stitched that together, and then when I flipped it out so that the skirt was actually hanging down, that lining midriff piece could get flipped up towards the top of the bodice on the inside. I am so proud of myself for coming up with this plan. I clearly went off book like immediately with the pattern, so I don't know what the instructions were as far as having a full lining. Like, I don't know the construction steps, but this is how I tackled it, and I'm so glad I gave myself enough days to really sit in this project and let it marinate and like think through all of the steps and like walk my brain through the whole process, because I don't always do that, and that's when I make big mistakes that could have been avoided had I actively let myself walk through the process. So very happy with how this ended up coming out. Then I just did a lot of top stitching in a lot of places and added the facing. Because of the scallop edges, like this is the one part I do wish I had done a different shape here just to make this part easier, but I'm so happy with how it came out. It was just such a pain in the dick to put together. This is probably the hardest part of the entire project, but so happy with how it came out. So worth the effort and the struggle. But yeah, I did tiny stitches. I trimmed down any of the curves and then notched and trimmed where necessary on the seam allowance there, flipped it out, did more top stitching, and got everything nice and pressed out. There is one pucker on one of the corners, and honestly it's not that noticeable in the photos that I was taking last night, so I'm not worried about it. Another hole that was in the sheet that I didn't notice is in a very obvious spot, and like that is noticeable if you're looking for it, but no one was like, oh, what's this hole? Oh, did it get torn here? Like no one took note of it, so I'm not gonna worry about it. Again, it's a costume. The other thing I do to keep a facing in place is where there's shoulder seams, where the midriff and stuff was, anywhere there were stitches of the outer pieces attached to each other, I restitched along those lines, either where the top stitching was or like stitch in the ditch, just to keep it from flipping out, because it is a big piece and I didn't want to be fucking with it all night. So just helping future me have a more enjoyable experience wearing the goddamn thing. Then I decided I was going to make some bias tape with some scrap fabric and hem the bottom that way, just trim the whole thing. I did do a ton of hand sewing because I thought it would look a lot nicer, but that also gave me a window of opportunity to watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And every time I think of that show name, I want to call it Falcor and the Winter Wombat, because my friends and I kept forgetting the name of the show and kept inserting other words that were definitely not correct, and Falcor and the Winter Wombat was definitely my favorite out of the list that my friends started making when we were just like spitballing dumb names to call the show. I did finish the show. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, so like be cool in the comments, but let me know if you saw it and liked it, because I very much enjoyed it, and I am on the Sebastian Stan train. Holy hell. I will become embarrassing immediately if I talk about him anymore. So on to the next step. I tried on the almost complete dress, and this was like the aha moment, like, oh, it's coming together so good. And instead of doing buttons and buttonholes as the pattern indicates, I just did snaps because it was going to be easier and less time consuming. So I just marked a couple spots. I only ended up using 3 snaps. I should have used more further up, and there's also instructions to put like hidden snaps or like hook and eye things on the inside, because I don't have a lining. It would have been very obvious there was hardware on the inside. Then the best part, okay, my original plan was just to duplicate the City of Rockford Peaches with the scale logo that's right on the center chest of the uniforms from the movie. But because the brewery I work for is called Rockingham, it clicked into my head when I got an email from my boss telling me like, hey, we're probably going to be on the Jumbotron at some point, so if you want to wear some Rockingham gear, we have plenty of shirts that they give us. Like, that would be really cool so we can like represent our crew. And I got really stressed out because I was like, oh crap, well I don't want to wear my City of Rockford Peaches dress if we all need to have like our crew gear on. Do I just have a backup outfit and like have one of my work tank tops on underneath the dress, but then that'll be showing through the dress because it's so thin? And then thankfully my brain put it together and was like, no, you dumb motherfucker, just make the logo say Rockingham Peaches, and then instead of the scales in the middle, put the little pig logo. And thus was born the Rockingham Peaches logo, and I'm so proud of how it came out. I just did it on my Cricut, and thankfully the Cricut program, if you're messing around with fonts, you can like curve the letters and stuff, so it was super easy to put this together. I just made the like target shape, like the 2 circles in MS Paint, loaded that into the Cricut, added the text, fused all that together, or welded it in the program, cut that out of the red, and then I just erased most of the Rockingham logo, which normally looks like this, and I just got rid of all this other stuff and left the little piggy, Rocky, and ironed him on in the middle. I even did a test patch on some of the scrap bias tape and a little tiny corner of the heat transfer vinyl because I have had it not stick to certain fabrics, and if it didn't stick, I was gonna like make a patch on some similar color or like white fabric and then stitch that onto the front of the dress. But thankfully it took the heat transfer vinyl beautifully, like way better than I anticipated. I didn't have to fight with it at all and it didn't want to come off. And then she was done. I cannot believe how swirly this dress is. I mean, that's the joy of circle skirts, right? Is the spin factor. The pockets are great. I did make them bigger because listen, I got really big hands, but it ended up being way more comfortable than I thought and not as sweaty as I maybe thought. I would probably shorten it for the next time that I wear this, even though I went through all that effort to hem that fucking bottom, but it's fine. It's just a very long dress, but also it suits it. And I wore it with my saddle Oxfords in these cute little like red and white polka dot socks that I never wear. And it just seemed like it suited the outfit really well. Honestly, I am normally someone that like loves coming up with the ideas, but genuinely gets too scared and self-conscious to actually like commit to the bit and like wear the thing and just own the cool thing I made that I'm really proud of. So the fact that I actually showed up with it, I have like gotten all dressed up for a thing. And even if I spent weeks, months working on a thing and was really proud of it and I thought it was a clever idea and like would be excited if I saw someone else wearing the thing, I have chickened out and not worn the thing out because it draws a lot of attention. And listen, I know I post videos every week, so you would think I'm more attention seeking than I am, but I genuinely get really scared and nervous about intentionally seeking that out. So I was kind of afraid to walk into the room with this dress on, but it went really well and everyone was really excited. It was good attention and like excitement and people being pumped about the reference to League of Their Own because it's such a beloved movie. Ended up turning into like a good bonding experience with the people I work with, and I got to show some of my skills in creativity, and like I'm really proud of the logo idea I came up with, even though it was very last second and kind of out of necessity. But is that not the mother of creation? I'm clearly still working on myself, but there's marked progress in so many factors, both with how the sewing project came out and the fact that I did the thing. I wore it out. I didn't just chicken out last second, not do it. Because even at that brewery, I have chickened out of wearing stuff that I've spent a chunk of time making. Like the Starberry dress I made last October, that was for an event there. Granted, there's also Panda Express concerns, and that was a big reason I didn't go. But like I made Bert's hot dog costume for that event too, so I'm gonna make myself dress up in that outfit this year and bring Bert in his costume this year and like just let it happen, even though I'm nervous even thinking about it. But yeah, I so appreciate that y'all have stuck around for such a long journey and very slow process of me building my skills, but also just being less afraid of things. I'm working on it. I'm hoping to continue to get better. And humongous thank you to everyone over on my Patreon, because I wouldn't have had this project happen if it wasn't for y'all, because it took a lot of time to put this together. I had a lot of days in this, including the mock-up, and just the planning time, going out and being able to buy, yes, I think I spent $7 on the fabric and then a couple bucks on the heat transfer vinyl. That stuff I wouldn't be able to afford material and time-wise without all of you. So I can't thank you enough for literally letting me live out a dream. I have wanted to make this dress for so long, and the fact I got to wear it in such a fun group to a baseball game, it was an absolute gift. So thank you so much for letting me have that. And speaking of little Bert, him and I are gonna go have a little snuggle session on the couch while I edit this. We will see you back here with another video next Friday. Thank you so much for hanging out. Let's reel the nerdery in. He's having none of my shit today.